guys, welcome back to Tech Guides Radio. Today we're going to talk about AOT metadata errors. All right, so I'm looking at the AOT documentation here, and it says the following are metadata errors you may encounter with explanations and suggested corrections. So the guide goes over expression form not supported, reference to a local non-exported symbol, only initialized variables and constants, reference to a non-exported class, reference to a non-exported function, so on and so forth. So we're going to go over a few of these today on today's episode. Hopefully by the end of the episode, we'll shed some light onto some of the metadata errors you can get with ahead of time compilation for the Angular framework. So it goes on to discuss destructured variable or constant not supported, could not resolve type, name expected errors, unsupported enum, member name, tagged template expressions are not supported, symbol reference expected. So pretty much all the errors you can get during compile time, ahead of time compile. So let's start with expression form not supported, and I'll read through this for you guys. So it gives a helpful hint here. The compiler encountered expression it didn't understand while evaluating Angular metadata. So language features outside the compiler's restricted expression syntax can produce this error. Okay, so that's when you would get it. There's an example, a clear example here of the error, why you might get the error. You can use a type of and bracket notation in normal application code. You just can't use those features within expressions that define Angular metadata. So keep that in mind. Avoid this error by sticking to the compiler's restricted expression syntax when writing Angular metadata, and be wary of new or unusual TypeScript features. So this is something you want to be wary of. The next type of metadata error would be reference to a local non-exported symbol error. So this means the compiler encountered a reference to a locally defined symbol that either wasn't exported or wasn't initialized. The compiler generates the component factory, which includes the use value provider code in a separate module. That factory module can't reach back to this source module to access the local non-exported foo variable. So that makes sense here. We have the providers array here with provide foo, use value foo, and it makes perfect sense. And it says reference to a local non-exported symbol, consider exporting the symbol is the sort of error message you get. Okay, so you might see that from time to time. Alternatively, you can fix it by exporting foo with the expectation that foo will be assigned at runtime when you actually know its value. All right, so these are kind of the common errors at compile step. So it's good to be mindful of these. This one's a bit tricky. We'll kind of, maybe I'll discuss that next time more in depth. But let's keep it moving. So only initialize variables and constants. So when would you get this error? The compiler found a reference to an exported variable or static field that wasn't initialized. It needs the value of that variable to generate code, quite simply. So that's another one to be mindful of. Reference to a non-exported class. So this means the metadata referenced a class that wasn't exported. For example, you may have defined a class and used it as an injection token in a providers array, but neglected to export that class. So take a look at your providers array and make sure that you do your due diligence so you don't run into this error. Angular generates a class factory in a separate module, and that factory can only access exported classes. To correct this error, export the referenced class. Okay, so it's tricky stuff. It's kind of just a mental checklist I like to do, and hopefully you don't run into any of these errors too often. Reference to a non-exported function. So for example, you may have set of providers use factory property to a locally defined function that you neglected to export. So yeah, this is when the metadata referenced function that wasn't exported, right? Cool. Some of the other ones are function calls not supported. So it means the function calls, just aren't supported. You can consider replacing the function or lambda with a reference to an exported function. That's the way to fix that one. So there are a few more here. Destructured variable or constant not supported. So referencing an exported destructured variable or constant is not supported by the template compiler. Consider simplifying this to avoid destructuring. All right, so if you have more questions about any of these, just email me and I can kind of explain to you further sort of how to fix some of these. Could not resolve type error. So the compiler encountered a type and can't determine which module exports that type. So this can happen if you refer to an ambient type, for example, the window type, as an ambient type declared in global.d.ts file. Right, so you'll get an error if you reference it in the component constructor, which the compiler must statically analyze. So these are so annoying, but yeah, if you do your due diligence, hopefully you won't encounter any of these too often. TypeScript understands ambient types, so you don't import them. The Angular compiler does not understand a type that you neglect to export or import. Remember that. Gotta always get those imports and exports right. Otherwise, you don't know where the code's coming in from, where it's going. Everything's modular. You gotta have the imports right and the exports right. Okay. All right. So the name expected error. This means the compiler expected a name and it's an expression that it was evaluating. This can happen if you use the number as a property name. And there's some examples here that I'm looking at. And yeah, if you're like, what the heck does this error even mean? You can always ask Gemini. You can paste it in the Gemini and see sort of what she thinks about it. Unsupported enum member name. So Angular couldn't determine the value of the enum member that you referenced in metadata. So that's what that one means. The compiler can understand simple enum values, but not complex values such as those derived from computed properties. All right, so we're almost at the end of this long list of metadata errors for ahead of time compilation. There are a few more here. Tag template expressions not supported. So the compiler encountered a JavaScript ES 2015 tag template expression that it didn't recognize. So the AOT compiler does not support tag template expressions, so you just avoid them in metadata expressions. So yeah, don't do that. Symbol reference expected error. So the compiler expected a reference to a symbol at the location specified in the error message. And this error can occur if you use an expression in the extends clause of a class. All right, guys. So in summary, there are about a dozen or so errors. Expression form not supported, reference to a local non-exported symbol, only initialized variables and constants, reference to a non-exported class, reference to a non-exported function, function calls are not supported error, destructured variable or constant not supported error, could not resolve type, name expected, unsupported enum member name, tag template expressions are not supported, and symbol reference expected. All right, so yeah, there are 12 of those. You might get asked one of these questions for like a senior UI architect interview for front end. The interviewer might ask you about ahead of time compilation and some of the metadata errors that you can encounter possibly. So yeah, memorize this list of 12 and you should be good. All right, guys, tune in again next time for another episode of Tech Guides Radio.